For the ancient Egyptians, the Nile River was an important source of food, fresh water, and transportation. Every year, the Nile would flood, and nutrients would fill and fertilize land, allowing crops to grow. Unfortunately though, the flood would also destroy their homes, forcing them to build new ones. The commoners would create the frames for their houses using cane. Then they would use clay to coat the frame. In contrast, the homes of the noblemen were a bit more sophisticated. Clay and cane were combined and then placed in wooden frames and left to dry in the sun. These sun-dried mud bricks were then used to create their homes. Cult structures, on the other hand, had to be permanent ones. You see, ancient Egyptians believed in the afterlife, and an eternal one at that. They believed that for their ka, or soul, to live eternally in the afterlife, their bodies would have to remain intact for eternity in this realm. So they had to create a way to protect the deceased from general damage and grave robbers. The Mastaba was born. Mastabas were flat roof structures made of adobe brick that stood 20 to 30 feet above ground. Inside, the mastabas contained chapels where traditional rituals were held. A statue representing the deceased would be placed within the masonry to allow the ka to find its way into the burial chamber, where the body was located 30 meters down. Mastabas were placed near one another, in proximity to the pharaoh's burial ground, creating an acropolis, or city of the dead. This is Djoser, and his chancellor, Imhotep. Imhotep was a priest, healer, and an architect, and he was to design the pharaoh's eternal home. Being creative as he was, he placed 5 mastabas, one above the next, to create the first ever Egyptian pyramid standing at 204 feet in height, the tallest structure ever built at the time. Now, this wasn't a true pyramid, as it didn't have continuously flat sides extending from base to top, but instead, it's considered a step pyramid. It was made up of limestone rather than mud bricks found in the traditional mastabas. Remember Imhotep and his crazy pyramid design? Well, Sneferu tried to create a true pyramid by altering Imhotep's original pyramid plan, but the project ended up caving in. This is known as the Pyramid of Medem. Sneferu's son, Khufu, learned from his father's mistakes and went on to participate in the creation of one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Great Pyramid of Giza, the tallest structure ever made by human hands. That was until the Eiffel Tower was erected in 1889. The pyramid was made predominantly of limestone and mortar, and granite was reserved for the king's chamber. It was originally covered with highly polished white limestone. What we see today is actually the core structure of the pyramid. The second pyramid at Giza belongs to Khufu's successor, Coffre. He is also credited for the idea of the Sphinx adjacent to the pyramid. The third and smallest pyramid of the 3 at Giza is the Pyramid of Menkaure, Coffre's successor. The sarcophagus discovered inside, which was believed to be Menkaure's, was transported to England in the early 1800s. Unfortunately, the ship sunk and the sarcophagus remains hidden to this day. It's important to note that each pyramid was smaller in size, and this is most likely due to the dwindling amount of resources. This resulted in Menkaure's successor being buried, not in a pyramid, but in a modest mastaba instead. Due to the lack of resources and a shift in power toward priesthood, ancient Egyptians stepped away from the pyramid and temples became the focal point of cult construction. Egyptians began building to honor a specific god, rather than kings. The largest temple complex includes the Temple of Amun in Thebes. Ancient Egyptian temples in general consisted of 4 parts: the entrance highlighted by pylons, a peristyle courtyard, a hypostyle hall, and the sanctuary. At the entrance, pylons towered up to be about 40 meters high. Before the pylons stood wooden flagpoles made of cedar, stone obelisks, and sculptures of the pharaohs. The peristyle courtyard, which followed, was a square courtyard framed by columns. This was open to anyone in ancient Egypt. The hypostyle hall, adjacent to the courtyard, was not. Access was given primarily to high officials. The hall featured clerestory openings used to flood the otherwise dark space with natural sunlight from above. Finally, the sanctuary, which was dedicated to the sun god and was to be used by priests only. The temple's design used columns to hold up stone purlings, or horizontal beams, and slabs were laid on top to form the roof. The columns were decorated according to their orders, each design referring to nature. Eventually, priests began to acquire more wealth and power than the kings, and the new kingdom merged into the late period, when Egypt was invaded by the Assyrians and Persians, the time when Alexander the Great arrived, who designed the city of Alexandria, also known as the Jewel of Egypt. If you enjoyed the video, remember to press like and subscribe if you want to see more architecture stories like this. Talk to you guys next time on our next adventure.